This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Anti-Taliban forces retake 3 districts in northern Afghanistan. The U.S. deploys special forces to fight an Islamist militia in the DRC. And preventing another pandemic. The WHO seeks experts to probe new pathogens. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Copper producers in Zambia say they are ready to start expansion projects worth $2 billion. And in sports, more countries withdraw from the 2020 Paralympic Games in Tokyo. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with me for this hour. We begin in Afghanistan, where Taliban co-founder Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar has arrived for talks on forming what officials say is meant to be an inclusive government. Meanwhile, many foreign nationals and Afghans seeking to leave the country remain stuck at the checkpoints on the way to the airport. The emergency airlift from Kabul is gaining speed amid criticism Western governments acted too slowly in the run-up to the Taliban's takeover of the capital. Taliban officials say the chaos at the airport is not their fault. Meanwhile, Pentagon officials say the U.S. military has sent special forces in helicopters past the U.S. secured airport perimeter to help stranded U.S. citizens. So far, the U.S. had evacuated more than 13,000 people. Meanwhile, anti-Taliban forces say they have recaptured 3 districts in northern Afghan province of Banglan. It's about 180 kilometers north of Kabul. The resistance forces say they're also moving towards other districts. Dozens of Taliban fighters were reportedly killed or injured. It's the first assault launched against the Taliban since they took Kabul last weekend. Well, CGTN's Zamaria Lai Abazen is standing by in Kabul for the latest on this. Zamaria Lai, welcome to Africa Live. Thank you for your time. Evacuation continues from Afghanistan, but access to the airport remains difficult. What's the situation now over there?
Hello, Richard. This is a really tough situation. The chaos, as you mentioned, still continues in Kabul airport and all around the airport. At the same time, foreign missions in Kabul and the hub areas, there are a lot of people reaching their number, thousands in different parts of the city that they are seeking refuge and want to flee the country. And at the same time, within the capital's airport, there are still crowds, there are still chaos and terrified people. I received messages from the friends that their relatives were stuck inside now with no food, no water, and no credit cards, and their phones are almost down. And this situation continues while there is no certain fate for those who want to flee the country, and the evacuees are still in a very bad condition. And that's why they are also complaining about the U.S. forces inside the airport and the Taliban that are standing in front of the door. But the Taliban authorities in Kabul said they have no problem with those who are fleeing the country. First, they will advise them to never leave the country because they said they want to assure them that they will not be harmed. But the people are in chaos and terrified. They are not assured about Taliban pledges and promises and whatever they say to them. That's why the rush still continues.
All right, disturbing scenes we are witnessing on the screen there, Maria Live. But we are also seeing an armed resistance against the Taliban. Now, who are these anti-Taliban forces? And also, what is the latest from the battlefront?
another saga already started in Afghanistan war scenario. Son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, Ahmad Massoud, is on the scene with former Vice President Amrullah Saleh, and they have besieged their forces in northern provinces, particularly in Panjshir as a central area of command. And Baghlan, there are many reports which are saying that at least 3 districts are collapsed to these resistant forces, which is called resistant 2, and already Junior Massoud or Ahmad Massoud have clarified that they will combat Taliban, and he has already asked United States and other Western countries to support them in regard to weaponry and ammunition. That's what's going on. And at the same time, in neighboring province, Parwan, there are also some activities reported from the resistant and the Taliban. They are not stepping up yet, but there are also reports about some injuries and fatalities due to the continuous war. And the Taliban leadership has continuously saying that they don't want enmity with anybody. This comes at a time that Hamid Karzai and Dr. Abdullah met some Panjshiri leaders and religious elders and commanders just Friday, and there are still continuous efforts to make a deal with them and avoid the war. But it's uncertain because that resistance side is focusing on coming in opposition and conflict with the Taliban.
All right,
Richard.
Zamriel Bazin, thank you very much for the very latest from Kabul. Moving on, the U.S. has resumed evacuation flights out of Kabul for tens of thousands of Americans and Afghan allies after a delay lasting hours. There are logistical problems getting people out safely, and processing facilities have hit capacity. President Joe Biden says he cannot guarantee the final outcome. Nathan King has more from the White House. Let's take a listen.
Well, was it third time lucky for the U.S. President Joe Biden as he attempted for that number of times to explain what the U.S. is doing in terms of extraction of its nationals and sympathetic Afghans and others from Kabul? Well, not really, because essentially all what he was saying is kind of contradicted by facts on the ground. He said that there have been about 18,000 removed, that there was a short delay because of overcapacity in Doha, in Qatar, at an airbase. We understand that Ramstein airbase in Germany and others are going to be opened up, but still it led to a delay of flights for 8 hours. He said that he really didn't know how many Americans were still left to get to the airport, but if you go to the airport, everything's fine. The Taliban will allow you in. Well, we know from the chaotic scenes that that is not the case, especially for Afghans, even if they have special immigrant visa paperwork as well. It's quite incredible considering that also other countries like France, the UK, and now potentially Germany are sending out special operations teams into Kabul, the Green Zone, the Diplomatic Zone, and elsewhere to extract their nationals and sympathetic Afghans and take them to the airport, while the Americans cannot. Now, they understand that the Americans are the most high profile, they're in contrast to the Taliban, but the fact that this hasn't been worked out, even though they're in constant contact, is a head scratcher. And, this president was elected on empathy. And he had one line, which is, we're going to get every American out we can, although they still admit they don't know how many Americans there are in Afghanistan. But he also said that Afghans who supported the US are almost, and I stress this, almost as important as Americans.
Yes, we're making the same commitment. There's no one more important than bringing American citizens out. I acknowledge that. But they're equally important almost as all those SIVs, we call them, who in fact helped us. They were translators. They went into battle with us. They were part of the operation.
Well, that's quite an incredible admission that there is an essentially apartheid system when it comes to extracting people. Just a real own goal from a president who got elected on empathy, on racial justice. Does it stop at the America's water's edge? Well, he's had a lot of criticism. He still defends his position, and he says, despite the fact that there's been big dissent revealed in the last 24 hours, especially with the State Department cable from people in Kabul saying the Taliban could take over in a matter of days, he says the consensus was that they would be able to withdraw in a more orderly fashion. Sometimes he says the chaos was predicted. It's not a best performance from a man who has 3 decades of foreign policy experience in the Senate as well. And I can also tell you that the world is watching. He said that NATO allies have been nothing but supportive. Well, you saw the parliamentary debate in the United Kingdom over the last few days. We're seeing similar words from Denmark, from France, from NATO allies. This is not the finest hour for the Joe Biden presidency. Nathan King, CGTN, in the White House.
Afghan journalist Parwiz Karo-Kale talked to a Taliban commander on how the group took control of Kabul and on the current security situation there.
Well, I have just found a few Taliban members in capital Kabul. They are right now in a private hotel and have lunch together. Around us, more residents and civilians also could be seen. They say we are here for the control of the people, to prevent the robbers, and they say we are committed to have control of the Kabul city.
We have a united team. The team has been committed to bring further security and peace to our countrymen. We have so far not seen any major security incident across the country. We have also arrested a group of robbers in Kabul, those who were attempting to loot people's property. We are waiting for our leadership to announce the next new Islamic government. This is not Ashraf Ghani administration, but a government that will not allow chaos in Kabul, as you have seen in the way we have done things in the past days. My team and I didn't sleep for 2 nights just to secure the people of Kabul.
The world marks the International Day of Remembrance and Tribute to the Victims of Terrorism on Saturday. The day was adopted to honor and support victims and survivors of terrorism in order to promote and protect their rights. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that the body will continue to support member states' efforts. This includes countering violent religious and political extremism, xenophobia, and racism. Officials say that the COVID-19 pandemic has slowed down efforts to support survivors and their families because of restrictive measures that have encouraged isolation. Acts of terrorism continue to harm thousands of people each year. A new report by the UN Counter-terrorism Office warns that the Islamic State, also known as Daesh, is regrouping and spreading across Africa. The UN Counter-terrorism Chief Vladimir Voronkov is urging for more support for African countries. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more.
Their capabilities may have been degraded, but in recent months, Daesh has spread relentlessly across Africa. That's according to a new report by the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations Counter-terrorism Office, Vladimir Voronkov, on threats posed by terror groups. Voronkov says Daesh is exploiting the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic to regroup, recruit new followers, and intensify its activities both online and on the ground. Since the start of this year, hundreds of civilians in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have been killed by the so-called Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. The UN report says the weakening of terror group Boko Haram in northern Nigeria will likely strengthen Daesh's so-called West Africa province. The report goes on to say its expansion in Central Africa and into northern Mozambique could also have far-reaching implications for peace and security in the region. Voronkov says a global response is urgently needed to support the efforts of African countries and regional organizations to counter terrorism and address its interplay with conflict, organized crime, governance, and development gaps. Also of concern is the evolving situation in Afghanistan. The UN counter-terrorism chief says Daesh has expanded its presence in Afghanistan and several Taliban members have been designated as terrorists by the Security Council. He says the international community must ensure that Afghanistan is not used as a launching pad for global terrorism. A global framework supporting countries requesting assistance is set to be launched next month. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Let's now bring in Akinole Olojo, a senior researcher in the Lake Chad Basin team at the Institute for Security Studies, into this conversation on Africa's efforts to counter terrorism. Akinole, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. Akinole, terrorism continues to spread in many African countries despite billions of dollars allocated to fight it. Why is this the case?
Thank you for having me. That's the big question, because the response to this is really not about how much we're spending in terms of billions of dollars. It's about where we're allocating this expenditure to, where are we spending it in, who are we engaging in terms of a comprehensive stakeholder engagement, and also about how accountable this whole process is. So I think it's a number of issues here we're looking at. It goes beyond also spending in terms of the military. We must look at this in terms of multiple levels of engaging the issue. So we're looking at addressing governance gaps, for instance. Are we making progress with that in countries in Africa? In terms of the criminal justice sector, is there accountability? Is there trust? Are we engaging the private sector in terms of how more effectively they can contribute to technological solutions in terms of more effectively managing borders? So there's a host of issues we're looking at, and we can go on in terms of also, are we addressing the ideology, countering the ideology of these groups? So it's a range of issues that goes beyond just spending money.
All right, significant points to look at there for sure. Well, today is the International Day of Remembrance of and tribute to victims of terrorism. What can African countries do to ensure victims get justice and the support that they need? Akinole?
Very important question. Yes, it's a day, first of all, when we not only remember those who have lost their lives, unfortunately, as a result of the impacts of violent extremism, but also those who are actively on the front lines, who are still trying to engage this problem. We're also remembering those as well who, of course, this is the period when we recall the events of 9/11. But then I think it also goes beyond that. We need to reflect on what is happening globally. So you made mention of Africa. We're looking at the Horn of Africa, for instance, in Somalia. In 2017, there were at least 500 people who died in one of the deadliest attacks in Mogadishu. That's quite a lot. We're looking at the Lake Chad Basin countries, Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, Niger, where for over a decade, we're seeing so many lives still being lost. And this calls for how we need to prevent this problem, because it's not only about commemorating something that happened in the past, but a problem that is still alive and well. So how do we focus or refocus on preventing the problem, or at least more effectively managing it on multiple levels? So we're talking about the welfare of families of victims as well. It entails that. And we need to think about this in terms of how we ensure that people are no longer vulnerable. Communities are taken care of, are carried along, are consulted. So it's a whole range of issues we need to focus on when we remember this day and victims who have lost their lives as a result of violent extremism.
Okay, Akinole Olojo, important statements that you've made there as well. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and analysis. Much appreciated. Time now for a short break. You are watching Africa Live. Do not go away. Here's what's ahead. Preventing another pandemic, the WHO seeks experts to probe new pathogens. And oxygen shortage persists in Tunisian hospitals.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. Here in Africa, the United States has deployed special operation forces to the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo to help the country's army fight against an Islamist militia known as Allied Democratic Forces. The militia is considered one of the deadliest armed groups operating in the mineral-rich region in the country's east. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
U.S. Special Operations Forces are in the Democratic Republic of Congo on the invitation of the country's president, Felix Tshisekedi. The troops will be based in the east of the country to support the Congolese army to fight against the Allied Democratic Forces rebel group, ADF. In March this year, the U.S. government designated the Allied Democratic Forces as a terrorist organization for its links to the Islamic State.
Notre coopération dans la lutte contre le terrorisme, comme vous savez.
This visit is proof of the bilateral cooperation between the U.S. and the DRC. Our countries are part of a global coalition against terrorism. We are determined to defeat the Islamic State and their partners, the Allied Democratic Forces. The U.S. Army will help the DRC Army restore peace in the east.
The arrival of the U.S. forces has been well received by some Congolese citizens.
No country can develop during war. That's why we support our president's decision to invite the U.S. troops. We hope they'll help our army wipe out the ADF, Codeco, and all other rebel groups operating in the east of our country.
The mission of the U.S. troops is set to last several weeks and will specifically target the ADF rebels. Civil society organizations accuse ADF fighters of killing more than 1,000 civilians in eastern DRC since 2017. In May this year, the government imposed a state of siege in Ituri and North Kivu provinces to try and end the killings. But the killings have continued despite the presence of Congolese troops and UN peacekeepers in the country's east. The military pact between the US and the DRC was agreed between the two countries in 2019. DRC President Felix Tshisekedi sought a strategic partnership with the United States to fight terrorism after his initial plan of allowing foreign troops from neighboring Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda was rejected by some Congolese officials. The move is a major shift from his predecessor, Joseph Kabila, who was against seeking the support of foreign forces to defeat armed groups like the Allied Democratic Forces. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
The Ethiopian government is now calling on the international community to condemn what it calls acts of terrorism allegedly being committed by the Tigray People's Liberation Front in the north. The press secretary in the Prime Minister's office also said the TPLF is now becoming a threat in the entire Horn of Africa region. She also absolved the government of any blame since it had already given peace a chance by declaring a ceasefire.
Heeding the calls for negotiation, the ultimate resolution for this, or initial step towards this, is a ceasefire. The government has extended that offer by declaring a unilateral ceasefire, which has been breached on several occasions.
The World Health Organization is calling for experts to join its scientific advisory group for the origins of novel pathogens to help prevent another pandemic. It's launched the application group process for the group, which would help with investigation into new high-threat pathogens that jump from animals to humans. The group is also expected to review progress on studies into the origins of the current pandemic that has killed millions across the globe. One finalized the panel of 25 experts is expected to have its first meeting in late September. Medical experts are working to learn more about the coronavirus, including how it evolves and mutates into the variants such as Delta. Our reporter Yang Zhao explains some research in place for us.
Scientists around the world try to beat COVID-19. Some are looking back to identify patterns in viral evolution and spreading. So just how to track them down? Viruses evolve by mutating. Mutation is a little bit like the game of telephone or Chinese whispers. Players pass on a simple word such as name one to another. The more times it's passed on, the more likely it is to be misheard or misinterpreted. As soon as this happens, the word can never go back to the original. So it could, for instance, go from name to fame to 5 and so on. This is pretty much how a virus mutates. Think of its genetic materials as a sequence of letters, and some of them can change over time. Scientists are doing whole genome sequences of the virus in order to know how they might look over time. Then what they need to do is to find out how the virus has most likely evolved. Let me show you how they do this. For example, we have 4 virus samples acquired from 4 different patients. RNA sequencing allows us to locate the genetic differences among those samples. Well, let's say it turns out like this. Sample A and B share the same mutations. C and D have mutations in unique spots, though C has 2 spots identical to A and B, which makes C genetically closer to A and B than D does. And you may also observe that mutations in some spots just show up more frequently than others. For example, all 4 viruses share the same mutation in the same position, suggesting that this mutation might belong to the common ancestor of all 4. Based on those principles, scientists can build up a genetic tree for those 4 samples. Apparently, A and B are genetically identical, coming from the same family. For C, it is closely related to A and B, though it looks slightly different than them at a green spot. But D is a bit like a distant relative. It has a unique mutation at a purple spot and only shares a remote common ancestor with A, B, and C. It's not over. Scientists will organize samples on the tree according to the date and location they were taken to show the bigger picture of virus evolution and transmission. It will look like this. When scientists understand how the virus has evolved and when and where cases have originated, they can figure out the transmission chain where patients will show up in the same cluster due to the genetic similarity of the viruses that infect them. Now you may ask, wouldn't it be great if we could have more sequences of viral genomes like that, so we could finish this puzzle? You're right. During these dark moments for humanity, it is encouraging to see so many scientific institutions around the world sharing their viral genomes. With more cases, you can imagine how big and detailed this chart could become. This is just a simple demonstration where only 4 samples have been included. And this is how a transmission chain looks like, based on more than 5,200 samples. So what does genetic tracking tell us about this new coronavirus? First, it is mutating at a relatively slow pace compared with, say, seasonal flu. It seems to have a mutation rate of less than 25 mutations per year. Seasonal flu has almost 50 mutations per year. So this is the good news. Fast changers like flu can easily invade a vaccine. So this new virus gives us more time to develop a long-lasting vaccine. Second, the earliest viral samples from Wuhan contain relatively few genetic variations. Most of them are what scientists call the L type. Research published in the peer-reviewed Cell Scientific Journal speculated that the novel coronavirus hasn't experienced too many mutations because the cryptic transmission of virus took place in human society before the outbreak in Wuhan. In addition, it also highlighted the remarkable job public health authorities in Wuhan did to control the first cluster of cases. Their strict physical distancing measure put a lot of pressure on the virus, preventing it from mutating and becoming more aggressive.
Despite the considerable support from foreign countries and governments who provided medical oxygen and oxygen production units for the Tunisian Health Department, the oxygen crisis persists. In fact, hospitals are still facing an oxygen shortage, and the civil society has mobilized to provide portable oxygen concentrators.
The municipality of Tunis has donated hundreds of oxygen concentrators to many public hospitals as well as basic healthcare centers in the popular neighborhoods of Tunisia in order to face the problem of oxygen shortage.
The municipality of Tunis is contributing to the national effort to fight the coronavirus. We are collecting donations from local associations and foreign partner municipalities, then providing oxygen concentrators to the hospitals where medical and paramedical staff are exhausted and patients are in urgent need for oxygen.
The governor of Tunis noted that the oxygen concentrators are life-saving machines. Therefore, local authorities and the health department have made portable oxygen concentrators available at home in order to provide oxygen supply to citizens facing respiratory issues.
We must be ready to face a new wave of the pandemic in autumn. It is necessary to provide oxygen concentrators at home because many hospitals could reach their maximum capacity in a few days if the number of infections rise in the capital city, Tunis.
Tunisia has the second highest number of coronavirus-related deaths in Africa after number 1, South Africa. This result was made public by the World Health Organization Regional Office for Africa based on data collected on August 15th.
The health situation is still critical, but the success of the vaccination drive will have an impact on the population in the next few weeks. 1 month ago, we managed the scarcity of vaccines, but now we're managing the availability of COVID-19 vaccines and the hesitancy of some people.
Tunisian authorities have allowed any Tunisian traveler to import an oxygen concentrator free of charge while returning to Tunis. Therefore, thousands of citizens are importing their own machines for personal or family use. According to the World Health Organization, Tunisia is leading the Maghreb region in the number of deaths. Experts at the Health Ministry and the COVID-19 task force are hopeful that the availability of oxygen concentrators will curb the rate of deaths. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
You're watching Africa Live. We've got our business segment coming up in just a moment. Here's a look at what's ahead. Copper producers in Zambia say they are ready to start expansion projects worth $2 billion.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. A copper producers say they are ready to start expansion projects worth $2 billion in Zambia next year. And that's, of course, if the industry can reach an agreement on royalties with President-elect Hakainde Hichilema's new administration. First Quantum Minerals Limited and EMR Capital are ready to raise funding for the projects, while other producers needed to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in capital that they'd held back since 2019 because of tax changes that deterred investment. Hichilema faces a tough task of turning around Zambia's economy. Aside from the coronavirus pandemic ravaging the economy, the nation also has to hold off creditors while the new administration restructures debt. Economists are ringing alarm bells over inflation in South Africa, even as data released shows a drop in annual consumer price inflation. Lending rates have remained historically low at 3.5% and 7% since last year, but upward pressure on food and oil prices may see that change soon. Richard Nta tells us more.
Annual consumer price inflation eased for a second month in a row, coming in at 4.6% in July from 4.9% in June. While this is good news, there are concerns of price pressures creeping in.
Inflation for oils and fats also continues to escalate, reaching an annual rate of 22.4%, the highest in almost 10 years. The food and non-alcoholic beverages category was the largest contributor to annual inflation, with price rises remaining steady at 6.7%, unchanged from June and May. Meat and oils and fats continue to exert upward pressure, with meat prices rising by 9.4% over the past 12 months. This rate has steadily climbed since August 2020 and is currently at its highest level since March 2018.
Agri-economists are also warning that higher global food prices are causing price escalations on the domestic front. Oils and fats again recorded the largest increase in July at 22%. Fuels rose 15%.
I think next month is going to be another issue, because we are going to get a much bigger petrol price increase, and that's going to mean we're going to see a jump in inflation. The base impact of inflation in July last year was quite large. It was the month-on-month was very big.
The rising cost of utilities are also leaving consumers out of pocket. Electricity recorded a 13.6% jump last month. Municipalities in South Africa raised tariffs in June and July to coincide with the new financial year. But Stats South Africa says the increases are much higher than 2020, despite a drop in water tariff increases.
You cannot have 15% increases in electricity prices and 10% in water, because that's what everybody actually, pays. And if we look at that situation, the administrative prices are increasing roughly at 9% or double the rate, and that's keeping inflation high.
Economists expect CPI to rise to 4.8% next month. The Reserve Bank has held back from hiking rates as a support measure to the economy and consumers, but has warned that it will have to start acting later this year in order to keep inflation under control. Richard Nta, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Still in South Africa, the country has published a new electricity regulation that will allow private and industrial users to generate their own power. The long-awaited regulations will liberalize the energy market. It also means that the state electricity utility, Eskom, will no longer dominate the entire market. Here's Richard Nta once more with the details.
Large industries are expected to line up for self-generation. The new regulations allows businesses and private users to generate up to 100 megawatts of power.
I think it's going to make a huge difference. I mean, it's a factor of 100 times higher than what it was before. And it's hoped that this will really unlock a significant amount of investment by the private sector.
For years, state-owned electricity utility Eskom has been the only major power provider in the country. Other generators were only allowed to generate 1 megawatt of power under a licensing exemption threshold.
It's good. It allows companies to do a couple of things. Firstly, to get a bit of resilience in terms of the electricity supply to ensure that they have stability by generating their own. And secondly, it allows companies to be able to use more renewable.
Electricity prices in South Africa have risen over 300% in the last decade. Eskom is granted tariff increases every year. Most of this money goes towards building new power plants and maintaining old infrastructure. The utility has also been plagued by years of corruption, and taxpayers have had to bear the brunt of higher prices and erratic power supply. Big businesses that need a stable electricity supply have been investing in their own power generation, but were stifled by regulations that allowed only minimal use.
To date, we've got about 35 stores that we've installed solar systems on. And then also we've signed up a contract with an energy provider that will install utility scale plants to generate more than 100 megawatts of renewable electricity.
Shoprite has cut its electricity bill by at least 1%, representing over $1 million. The regulations will drive a lot more investment.
We are realizing some business benefits, some financial benefits, in the sense that we are able to source the renewable electricity at a tariff that is lower than what is supplied by the national grid. We will have an energy provider providing us with electricity wheeled to our different stores. And that will represent about 25% of our electricity that we use, and will start in the next 5 to 7 years.
It will take time though, but experts are pleased that the market has been opened.
There's a whole lot of processes by NERSA that are going to have to be really streamlined in order to cater for the volume of application. At the moment, the registration process and the licensing process is very cumbersome.
While this is good news for private users, Eskom is likely to suffer a drop in sales. But with a record number of load-shedding days in 2020, many are more concerned with keeping the lights on. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Kenyan government's arrears on payments to contractors and suppliers has increased 8% in the year through June. The pending bills, including unfulfilled statutory payments to agencies such as pension funds, amounted to $3.3 billion. The National Treasury says the outstanding claims continue to surge even after President Uhuru Kenyatta issued a directive more than a year ago to quickly settle them. Now, delayed payments in some instances for years have hit businesses in East Africa's largest economy and led to some collapse. Zimbabwe's poultry industry is targeting between 35 to 40% growth this year as it rebounds from a drought-induced slump in 2020. CGTN's Brian Wakatiya has the details from Harare.
Tafadzwa Charumbira claps his hands to rouse his chickens so they keep feeding and reach their commercial weight on time. Just 1 day longer than necessary means the birds start eating into his profits, which are already tight in a business that operates on close margins. Charumbira chairs an association of over 600 small-scale poultry farmers who are planning to increase their production on the back of last year's bumper harvest.
The major challenges that we have, which makes it a bit difficult, is the current economic environment, where things are changing. Sometimes the prices of your input costs are skyrocketing, but the intervention of this association, where they have helped us with access to finance and where they are also helping us with a better or good agricultural practices, makes it much helpful. We have seen farmers growing and doubling their production capacities. For instance, my example, I was doing 2,000 beds before the initiation of this association. Now this batch is 4,100. We are targeting to be doing 10,000.
Small-scale farmers are expected to drive growth of chicken meat production projected at between 35 to 40%.
So our emphasis as an industry and the emphasis as my chairman is to grow the small sector. So we need the environment to be equal, the bumper harvest of maize, good prices of maize will give us a better product. Also availability of foreign currency, to import raw materials like hatching eggs, and also to import machineries to retool hatcheries.
If the conducive environment is created, the industry has capacity to produce 15,000 tons of chicken meat per month. Average monthly output for the first quarter of 2021 was 10,573 tons, 21% higher than the same period last year. However, there are lurking risks that need mitigating.
Small-scale poultry farmers have been urged to meticulously adhere to biosafety and security protocols. These will prevent outbreaks of avian diseases that have previously stumped production and that could financially ruin them.
2 avian influenza outbreaks in 2017 led to some neighboring countries banning chicken imports from Zimbabwe and forced the culling of more than 240,000 birds at a single farm owned by the country's biggest poultry producer. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Rua, Zimbabwe.
FDI inflows into Tanzania are recovering, having hit a 5-year high of just over $1 billion in 2020, despite the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. CGTN's Isaac Lucando has the details.
Foreign direct investment inflows into Tanzania are on the up, but getting to the over $1 billion attracted last year has not been easy. The last time Tanzania attracted this much was in 2015, when it attracted $1.5 billion.
You have a president or a minister or any other statement running those policies thinking this direction, and once another one comes in, then he changes or she changes everything, you run in a different, towards a different line. And that does not give confidence to the investors, whether they are within the country or from outside the country.
Last year, Tanzania's economy grew by 4.7% amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Economists argue that the resilience of the country's economy may be one of the reasons behind the increased foreign direct investment. 5 months into her presidency, Samia Suluhu Hassan has set attracting more investments at the top of her agenda.
I ask those supervising this area to be just. We want investors to enjoy a great environment in Tanzania. When we create bureaucratic situations, we discourage them.
At around $3 billion worth of trade annually, China is one of Tanzania's largest foreign investors and could be a solution to the country's investment needs. The Chinese business community in the country has already signaled interest in investing in a number of projects, including the manufacturing of mobile phone handsets. According to the 2021 United Nations World Investment Report, foreign direct investment to Africa last year stood at $40 billion, a 16% decline compared to the previous year. The road ahead is not easy either, with investments on the continent expected to increase only marginally this year. As the African continent grapples with the effects of a third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, economic experts say innovation and comparative advantages will be key in navigating these challenging times.
Tanzania is bordering 8 African countries which are very strategic, and if you juxtapose that with logistics and transport, there is a lot that this country can gain from the foreign direct investments, and of course data have been showing the same.
This year, Tanzania's central bank projects that the country's economy will grow by at least 5.6%. The government hopes that foreign direct investments will be the engine that drives that growth. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
We are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a peek at the headlines. More countries withdraw from the 2020 Paralympic Games in Tokyo.
How would you create